Greetings sailors, welcome to some World of Warships action, and today we have a Colorado game for you courtesy of Mawo. Now this thing has a bit of a reputation, and I almost actually made this a double feature, but then decided it was enough to stand on its own. But I was looking for Pensacola replays as well, because all of the American Tier 7s, even the premiums, they're not very well regarded. There's this, the Pensacola, the Atlanta, and the Sims. And there's probably a couple of people out there that will speak up for each one, but the majority seem to dislike them. And just looking at the stats for the Colorado, which I don't have myself, it seems like a straight upgrade on the New Mexico in everything but speed, basically. Now, as Mawo points out in the chat there at the start, this is slightly rough matchmaking. The enemy team actually has some Tier 9 battleships, and they don't. But player skill does come into effect, obviously, in this game, just like it does with World of Tanks. As much as the RNG can be annoying sometimes, you know, at the end of the day, over enough battles, it is player skill that matters. But maybe one of the things about the Colorado in particular is just the speed of it, because we're going to have to do some fairly heavy editing in this battle to cut ahead to actually get to the action. 2 hours later. We've skipped ahead a few minutes and, well, he's not quite in range of anything yet either. Maybe that's one of the other frustrations of this thing. It does get a better range than the New Mexico, and you can mount range extending equipment on it, but it still suffers in comparison to the Japanese battleships. And it's not really until the North Carolina at Tier 8 where you start to get comparable ranges to your battleship counterpart. So, I don't know, it might just be that the New Mexico sitting at Tier 6, it's not really an issue, but then you get to this at Tier 7 and you're seeing tougher enemies with very similar characteristics in some ways to the New Mexico. Maybe it's just less good. Anyway, still no shots on anything, so I guess we're just going to have to skip ahead a bit again. 7 hours later. Hurrah! We're almost in range. Well, kind of. We're almost in range if Mawo uses his spotter plane, which he does, because that's probably a decent option on American battleships. If you can get the spotter plane, then yeah, especially the later ones. The anti-aircraft is actually quite good on these things, so it's not, you're not going to miss out too much by not having the fighter. Some people will prefer the fighter, but of course there are occasions like this one where the spotter plane and that extra range is going to be very useful. Now he's finally getting to fire at stuff, and this is one of those replays where for some reason it just shows him firing HE, even though I'm almost certain a lot of this was AP. I've had this on my own replays. This is a 5.2.3 game, so it's the current patch basically. I've had it with my own games where it for some reason shows you shooting HE the entire battle. It's just one of the quirks of the replay system. It's not quite bug-free yet, but hell, having said that, neither's World of Tanks, and that's been going for years now, and every time they introduce a patch it's a gamble as to whether it is going to be entirely, you know, if it's going to be quite smooth, or is there going to be a new replay bug to deal with, or you just never know. You just never know. Anyway, he's actually managed to rack up a little bit of damage. 12.7 no, 12. Yes, no, 12.7 would be correct, wouldn't it, actually? Sort of halfway between 12.7 and 12.8. It's exactly 12,750. The number confused me. I do like that about warships, by the way. The fact that there's no damage rolls, there's no penetration rolls. There's a lot of RNG in the shell dispersion, especially when you're playing a battleship. But when it comes to hitting enemy ships and doing damage, the numbers are all very predictable. You can tell where you've hit, what kind of damage you've done by the numbers that pop up. It's that there's no RNG involved at all, and that is, for me anyway, that's a very nice feature of this game over World of Tanks in particular. So they've got a good push coming up the 8-9 line. There's a lot of ships sort of heading up this way. Though there's one or two cruisers that are maybe heading back towards the cap circle because it's looking maybe a little open. They've got some destroyers further over to the west and then a Tirpitz a little behind the cap circle. But this is basically their main thrust of ships, and actually it looks like the enemy team is kind of spread out in a similar fashion towards the north. So instead of the enemy team having pushed, all pushed even south, it's actually the case that both teams are sort of sailing in a line, more or less-ish, bit of a messy line, in the same area of the map. So they're all just sailing up and down and pelting shells at each other. Now, being in a crowd in warships is good. It means you're less likely to be focused down and targeted. But if you're facing an enemy crowd, of course, that can potentially be massed firepower coming at you, especially if people start marking targets and other people start paying attention to those targets. So it's kind of a two-way street. Overall, it can be less risky, but if you do suddenly get started shot at, or if you are starting to be shot at, then things can get very hairy very quickly. He is actually attracting some fire, having said that, but it doesn't look like these enemies are focusing particularly. They don't seem to be singling out targets. And I will note that Mao's team has got a division, but the enemy team doesn't. So the only communication that's going on is going to be in chat and via the in-game commands. There's nobody sitting there on TeamSpeak going, right, we're gonna go for this guy, and then we're gonna go for that guy, and then we're gonna take out this ship, which is a pretty powerful thing, that ability to coordinate. So you might have noticed on the minimap, Mao's now the only one that's still heading north, and yeah, that's the Benson up ahead of him that was last spotted in B7. All of his allies have turned around again. And it's not like the cap's immediately being threatened, it's just they didn't want to continue the push. They've just wanted to keep their distance, and so they've all turned around and they're sailing back down the way they came and just lobbing shells across at the enemies as they go. Just the same as they've been doing up till now, basically, in a different direction. So there's the Benson. Yep, it's definitely him. Don't know if Mao had noticed at this point, but he's going to very soon, hopefully, because that guy could do him some serious damage. The Colorado, like the New Mexico, goes at a maximum of 21 knots, although it turns relatively quickly for a battleship, so dodging torps isn't that difficult if you've got fair warning, but you have to be paying attention. So it would help maybe if he'd point himself in the direction of this Benson. Now we did see just the tail end of some torpedoes a little bit earlier, so the Benson was probably reloading, but the fact that he was close enough to be spotted by Mao was a missed opportunity to actually shoot at this guy. However, Mao is now turning his focus, and there we go, yep, more torpedoes on the way. But this Benson was not really, like, he didn't spread these out very intelligently. He sent them all off in the same direction, basically. And that's meant that Mao's had a very easy time of dodging them. Whereas if he'd spread them around a bit more, Mao might have taken one or two of them, and even one or two torpedoes from a tier 8 destroyer, that can be quite a lot of damage. So this guy's got to reload again now, and I don't know what the Benson's reload is offhand, except I think I probably do, because it'll be the same as the Lo Yang, won't it? With the at least with the stock torpedoes, it was something like a minute 40, a minute 50, 2 minutes. It was that kind of range. So they're not particularly quick loading torpedoes. So Mao has got some time to work with here. So he shaves off a bit of health. He's got this guy selected for secondaries as well. And he's probably going to be able to take this guy out before he can reload his torps. I'm not quite sure what the Benson was thinking here. Maybe he is really close to being reloaded and he's just taking the very high risk maneuver, and as it is, actually Mao's secondaries take that guy out. So he pops a repair, and well, now the only remaining enemies are quite far to his west, so yeah, you know what's going to come up next, don't you? I think you've figured out the pattern by this point. 72 hours later. So we're coming back in quite briefly, actually. because he's about to get his second kill, and it's quite a nice one as well. Now with his spotter plane out again, he just has the range for this Admiral Hipper, and his shots are out, so, well, I've already said it's going to be a kill, but what kind of a kill is it going to be? Well, that kind apparently. One hit for 26,000 damage. Yes, that had to have been a magazine detonation. Surely. There we go. Actually, it does say in the messages as well, detonation, so that is exactly what it was. 4 to 6 weeks later. So, here we are on the final stretch. In the interval, I'm sure Mawo had enough time to, oh, I don't know, teach himself how to juggle, read War and Peace, do other things that take a long time. Yeah, I might be stretching that joke a bit thin now. Speaking of War and Peace, actually I've been rather enjoying the BBC adaptation that's been on our tellies recently. Oh, well, on the iPlayer website if you're like me and don't actually own a telly. But yes, that was very, very enjoyable. Nothing to do with the game at hand. That's just occurred to me having said War and Peace. That will be why it's on my brain. So, this is the last couple of enemy ships. They're actually not that far apart in numbers, but they're winning, basically. They do have the upper hand at this point. He did have a brief flirtation with some dive bombers in the interval, and he's taken a little more damage, but otherwise he's still looking relatively healthy. He's also got an Ibuki and a Tirpitz very close behind. The enemy surviving carrier, having said surviving carrier, there was only one, he's not going to be surviving for very much longer, has actually been trying to knock out their carrier, so Mawo hasn't had to worry about torpedo bombers or anything coming after him as well. He's just had a couple of bombs landing on the deck, which is, you know, that's fine, that's no problem. Having your ships bombed is, you know, that was never an issue in World War II. Nobody ever really minded about having bombs dropped on their heads. I don't know where I'm going with that. Anyway, this Iowa is obviously the prime target. He is quite low health in comparison to the Izumo, so that's going to be the one they'll want to take down first. And this is the stage of the battle he actually says. How did we win this? In the chat. I think he just was looking at the matchmaking and seeing those tier 9 battleships and just feeling so pessimistic, and then somehow it's not mattered that the enemy team had tier 9 battleships and they didn't. Their tier 9 battleships apparently didn't play particularly well, and that makes all the difference in the world. You can be a terrible player in a great anything in World of Tanks, World of Warships, it doesn't matter, and yeah, you'll get away with more than if you were in a really lackluster, weak machine by comparison, but in comparison to what a really strong player could do in a really strong tank, it's a hell of a big gap, and I think that is just the case in this battle. There just was that big gap. So this Iowa, well, if Mawo's lucky, this is the kill. This will be a third kill, in fact a fourth kill, because he took the carrier, I think. I wasn't paying attention, but he gets a little unlucky there. Only one hit and it's a bounce, and it looks like someone else is going to get the kill. There we go, he burns out, and I think it's the Ibuki that got that, not sure. So that just leaves the Izumo, and I actually just bought one of these things literally a couple of hours ago. Finally I got enough credits, and if you've been watching me on Warships streams over the last like 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, you'll know I've been playing a lot of my Tirpitz. Oh, Citadel, very nice. Just to try and get the credits for my very first tier 9, and my very first tier 9 is the Izumo, which is famed for being a terribly awkward ship to play because all of its turrets are on the foredeck. It has no turret armament aft. So that means you basically can't shoot anybody behind you. It's a bit awkward. However, the secondaries are pretty nice though. The range you can get on the secondaries, if you use the secondary module and a flag, you can get it to nearly 11 kilometers, and I think that's probably the same as the Yamato. I don't think it gets any better than that on the Yamato. It might be a little better, I'm not sure. But in the end, I decided to swap out that secondary module for the accuracy. Anyway, that Nagato was the last thing left, and Mawo actually walked away with that final kill. So that was very nice, and as you can see, he got 1 devastating strike medal. Otherwise, a pretty good result, over 2,000 base XP, so by far the top of his team. The Tirpitz did very well, the Nagato, as you can see, did very well. In fact, there was a lot of people with very decent scores in this particular game. So just everybody was pulling their weight. And on the enemy side, well, yeah, those... I mean, the Iowa was in second place, but... the Izumo and the other Iowa were really not. They were well down the team list. So, yeah, as I was saying, the players matter a lot. You know, the ships, the vehicles matter, but the players matter almost as much, if not more. So there we are, the Colorado. I am actually slowly grinding towards it myself. I'm at an interesting place because I've got both the Colorado and the Pensacola as my next Americans to buy at some point. And I've just bought the Izumo and I'm grinding out the modules for that. But honestly, after having played like 10 battles in it, maybe, it might not even be that, it doesn't feel like a bad ship. It just feels very awkward because you have to drive it in a really peculiar way compared to a lot of battleships because you've just got those forward turrets. And actually the Brits are going to get one exactly the same if it makes it into the game, and I don't see why it wouldn't. The Lord Nelson class, which was the exact same configuration, it has 3 forward turrets and no rear turrets. So yeah, someday the Royal Navy drivers will have that to look forward to as well. So hopefully you've enjoyed this and didn't find it too gimmicky. I just couldn't resist. I don't know where the idea came from. I mean, I like SpongeBob, but I don't think I've ever dropped it into an episode like this before. But anyway, yes, hopefully you didn't find it too gimmicky, and I promise I won't spam it at you again in future anytime soon. And if you have enjoyed it, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you aren't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.